Today is the second Sunday of Lent. Our Gospel is taken from chapter 4 of John, verses 5 through 42. We know the story well. It's about an encounter. Jesus on his own, with a woman on her own, in the middle of the day, at a well in Samaria. Some background information will help give context and help us to understand this. Judea lies to the south of Samaria. Judea is where Jerusalem is. Galilee lies to the north of where Samaria is. Jesus spent most of his time, most of his ministry in the north, in Galilee. But he did come to Jerusalem, perhaps as many as 3 times. Of course, he had to pass through Samaria. The Samaritans didn't like the Jews. The Jews didn't like the Samaritans. The great scholar of John's Gospel, Raymond Brown, explains there was theological opposition between these northerners and the Jews of the south because of the Samaritan resistance to worshipping in Jerusalem. They had their place of worship on Mount Gerizim. The Jews had theirs. Never the twain would meet. Also, in history, they remembered when the Jews returned from exile towards the end of the 6th century BC, that's almost 500 years before Jesus, the Samaritans stood in the way. They resisted the restoration of Jerusalem. And in the 2nd century, the Samaritans helped the Syrian monarchs in their fight against the Jews. The Jews, led by the high priest in 128 BC, destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. So there you have it. Is this unusual? Is this just religious people being nasty, as religious people always are, you know? I'd say it's human beings being human. Conflict, division, even hatred are endemic to the human condition. No one, no society has found a way beyond it to set us free from such brokenness, such fallenness. We need to be redeemed. It's destructively naive, I believe, to say, look, yes, there are some nasty people in the world, but most people are decent, aren't they? Even us decent folk need to be redeemed. There's nobody yet to be born, apart from Jesus and Mary, who escape tendency to conflict, bias, prejudice, resentment, even hatred. It's what we have to deal with, and it's what Jesus is here for. Jesus means freedom. Jesus is able to liberate us from these inclinations to division and conflict that is so much part of our lives. I haven't yet met the family that doesn't have it, or the individual that doesn't have it, or the community that doesn't have it. Jesus means reconciliation. Jesus brings love, as John says elsewhere. The love that Jesus brings casts out fear. Fear is very often at the basis of our conflict and our division. In John chapter 17, Jesus' prayer is that there may be one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you, may they be in us. That's what's on offer in the incarnation. That's what's available to us through Jesus. The Samaritan woman, in encountering Jesus, you can almost feel the ties that bind dropping away. Ties that are cultural, ties that are religious, ties that are social. You might have observed that the first comment the woman made to Jesus, you a Jew, asking me, a Samaritan, for water. Prejudice. When the disciples returned from fetching food in the village, they are perplexed. Not only is Jesus talking to a woman, but she's a Samaritan. They too are bound. They've got ties that bind them up, prevent them from being free. What is on offer in Jesus? Not in some magical formulae, but in a life lived through him, with him, and in him, is freedom from the ties that bind, freedom for a reconciled communion in God. We believe in him. Recall chapter 14 again of John's Gospel, when Thomas basically says, how do we get to where we're going? And, what are the coordinates? What's the street address? What's the phone number? What are the contact details? The implication, unspoken in such a question, is, if you give us the details, we'll make our own way there. We'll be in control. In other words, he was asking for something that would feed the fiction of control. Jesus doesn't give it to him. Jesus simply says, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. We believe that. He is our Redeemer. He is our path to freedom. In him, through him, with him, we discover incrementally, gradually, through trial and error, what it means to be human.